In 1983, Commodore Business Machines sells more personal computers than Apple and IBM combined. Not slightly more, measurably, undeniably more. It is the largest personal computer company on Earth. 11 years later, it is gone. Not acquired, not merged, liquidated, erased, and the person most responsible for killing it built it with his own hands. To understand how Commodore destroyed itself, you have to understand Jack Tramiel. Born in Poland in 1928, he survived the concentration camps of World War II, emigrated to the United States with almost nothing, and built, through sheer force of will, one of the most aggressive technology companies the world had ever seen. His philosophy was a single sentence: computers for the masses, not the classes. It was not a marketing slogan, it was a war cry. Tramiel started Commodore in 1954, originally selling typewriters. He moved into calculators just as the calculator market was booming, then ruthlessly undercut every competitor until they either collapsed or fled. Texas Instruments, once a dominant player in handheld calculators, exited the consumer market largely because of what Tramiel did to prices. This was his signature move: drive costs so low that the market itself reshapes around you. He did not fear a price war. He started them. By the late 1970s, Commodore was deep inside the home computer market. The Commodore PET launched in 1977, the same year as the Apple II and the TRS-80, but it was the Commodore 64, released in 1982, that changed everything. It launched at $295, a fraction of what comparable machines cost, and it sold 17 million units over its lifetime, a record that stood for decades. For a brief, extraordinary moment, Commodore owned the future. But there was a structural problem that no sales figure could paper over. Commodore was, in its deepest culture, Jack Tramiel. And Jack Tramiel did not build institutions. He built pressure. He surrounded himself with engineers who were brilliant and terrified, finance people who hoarded information, and a board that was perpetually off balance. Departments did not cooperate. They competed internally, viciously, in ways that paralyzed decision-making and buried good ideas before they reached daylight. Irving Gould, the Canadian financier who had backed Commodore since the early days, was technically Tramiel's boss as chairman of the board. Their relationship was the slow-burning fuse at the center of everything. Gould provided the capital, Tramiel provided the vision. But two men who both believe they are the real power in a company cannot occupy the same space forever. The rupture, when it came in January 1984, was fast and bitter. Tramiel resigned. The reason given publicly was compensation. The real reasons were almost certainly more complicated and never fully settled. The departure of Jack Tramiel did not simply leave a leadership gap, it left a values gap. Tramiel's obsessive cost discipline, however brutal, had been the engine of the company's competitiveness. Without him, spending loosened, internal politics calcified, and the strategic clarity he had enforced, however crudely, evaporated. What followed was a series of decisions that, in hindsight, look less like strategy and more like drift. Expensive drift. Tramiel, for his part, did not retire. He bought Atari from Warner Communications within months of leaving Commodore for $1 plus assumed debt in a deal that was almost theatrical in its symbolism. He was now the head of Commodore's most direct competitor, and he brought with him several key Commodore engineers. The men who had built the Commodore 64 were now designing machines meant to destroy it. The rivalry became personal in a way that industries rarely sustain. Commodore's answer to its own existential moment was the Amiga. And here is the cruel irony at the heart of this story. The Amiga was genuinely extraordinary. Released in 1985, it was years ahead of anything else in its price range. Superior graphics, superior sound, genuine multitasking at a time when most home computers could barely walk and chew gum simultaneously. Video professionals used it. Musicians used it. The BBC used it for broadcast graphics. It was not a mediocre product that failed. It was a remarkable product that was failed by its company. Commodore's marketing of the Amiga was, to put it diplomatically, incoherent. They could not decide if it was a home machine, a professional workstation, or a gaming platform, so they sold it as all three and persuaded buyers of none. The launch event in 1985 has become something of a legend in technology history, not for what it showed, but for how strange it was. A presentation involving Andy Warhol painting a digital portrait that left most observers more confused than converted. This was a company that had lost the ability to talk to its own customers. Pricing decisions compounded the problem. Commodore's instinct, Tramiel's old instinct, was to cut prices. But the post-Tramiel management applied that tool without the underlying cost discipline that had made it a weapon. They cut prices on the Amiga without sufficiently cutting the cost to build it, which squeezed margins that were already thin. Retailers grew frustrated with the volatility. Developers, uncertain whether the platform would survive, hedged their bets and prioritized other machines. The ecosystem that a computer platform absolutely requires began to hollow out. Through the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, Commodore released a succession of machines: the Amiga 500, the Amiga 3000, the CD, the Amiga 4000, the CD32, each with genuine technical merit. Each launched into a market that was increasingly consolidating around IBM-compatible PCs running Microsoft software. The window Commodore needed to establish the Amiga as a serious alternative was narrowing every year, and the company seemed unable to feel the urgency. New products arrived late, marketed poorly, priced inconsistently, into channels that had already begun drifting toward the competition. Irving Gould, still nominally in control, cycled through CEOs with a regularity that made long-term strategy nearly impossible. Each new executive inherited an organization that had been shaped by years of internal conflict, and then handed a company with shrinking runway. The people who understood the technology deeply were rarely the people making the commercial decisions. The people making commercial decisions rarely had enough conviction to hold a course. It was a failure of governance as much as anything else. A board that had tolerated dysfunction because, for a long time, the sales numbers had made tolerance feel affordable. By 1993, Commodore was burning through cash it did not have. The CD32, launched that year, was in some markets genuinely selling. There are accounts of it outselling competing consoles in the United Kingdom in the weeks after launch. But in the United States, a legal dispute over patents blocked its import entirely, cutting off what might have been the company's last meaningful revenue lifeline. It was the kind of misfortune that healthy companies survive and fragile ones do not. Commodore was not healthy. On April 29, 1994, Commodore International filed for liquidation. Not bankruptcy protection, not restructuring, liquidation. The assets were sold. The brand was sold. The engineers scattered. The Amiga technology passed through a series of hands over the following years, each new owner promising revival, none delivering it in any meaningful sense. A machine that had genuinely been ahead of its time was left to become the subject of retrospectives rather than the foundation of an industry. The thesis of Commodore's collapse is not complicated, though it took years to play out. A founder built a company so thoroughly in his own image that the company could not survive his absence. The culture he created, high pressure, low trust, intensely political, was functional only because his vision and cost discipline held it together. When he left, the pressure remained, but the direction disappeared. What had been a weapon became a wound. Commodore had the product. At several points in the late 1980s, the Amiga was objectively superior to what the market was choosing. What Commodore lacked was the organizational coherence to capitalize on that superiority. The ability to market consistently, to support developers, to hold a pricing strategy, to tell a story that the world would believe. Great technology, in the end, does not sell itself. It needs a company behind it that knows what it is doing and why. Commodore, after January 1984, never fully recovered that clarity. Jack Tramiel died in 2012. The Commodore name exists today as a licensed brand on products that have no meaningful connection to what he built. The Amiga has a devoted community of enthusiasts who have kept parts of the platform alive through sheer affection, which is a remarkable testament to how good the machine was. But devoted communities are the monuments companies build when they are gone, not when they are winning. Commodore was once winning. It is worth understanding exactly how it stopped,